His hair. That was the first thing that broke. Not his voice. Not his composure. His hair, yanked back so hard his neck snapped with it, and the whole emergency room went cold and quiet like someone had cut the sound. Caden Moreau did not scream. He couldn't. The air left his lungs the second the grip locked in. His fingers found the edge of the intake desk and held on. His knuckles went white. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they always did, indifferent and sharp, washing everything in that sickly white that made sick people look worse and powerful people look like gods. Draven Kale looked like a god. He wasn't screaming either. That was the part that got people. That was the part that made two nurses press themselves against the far wall instead of stepping forward. He wasn't out of control. His jaw was set. His grip was precise. His teal eyes were locked on Caden's face the way a surgeon looks at a wound. Not with feeling, but with absolute focus. "Look at me," Draven said. Low, measured. Like they were the only two people in the room. They weren't. There were 11 other people in that ER waiting area. Phones were coming up. Slowly at first 1, then 2, then 5. Nobody said a word. A child in the corner chair buried her face in her mother's arm. An older man in a hospital gown stared with his mouth open. A security guard near the entrance had his hand on his radio but hadn't pressed a single button. Caden looked. He had no choice. And the second he did, the second his eyes locked onto that face, something cracked open in the back of his memory. Not the moment. Not even the man exactly. The scent. Cedar. Cold air. The back end of October years ago. His body recognized it before his mind did, and his stomach dropped 3 floors. He knew this man. He had not expected to know this man. Hi viewers. If someone who once protected you suddenly turned around and humiliated you in public, would you walk away or would you stay to find out why? Draven held the grip for exactly 4 seconds. Then he let go. He straightened his jacket. He did not look at the phones. He did not look at the nurses. He looked at Caden for one more beat. Something unreadable moving behind those eyes, and then he turned and walked toward the corridor like nothing had happened. Caden's legs were shaking. He gripped the desk harder. His scalp burned. The whispers started immediately, low and electric, spreading across the waiting room like a current. Nobody came to him. Not yet. Across the room, near the triage desk, a nurse named Deja had stopped walking mid-step. She wasn't looking at Caden. She wasn't looking at Draven's retreating back. She was looking at the security monitor mounted above the triage window, at the split-screen feed cycling through the hospital's cameras. Her face had gone pale. Caden pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed. He told himself it was fine. He told himself it was over. He was still telling himself that when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. A single line of text. Incident report filed. Case number 4471. ER lobby. 9:42 p.m. He looked up. The waiting room was still humming. Someone was crying quietly 2 seats down. The security guard had finally stepped away from the wall and was speaking into his radio in a low, urgent voice. Outside, through the wide glass doors of the ER entrance, the parking lot sat still and dark. One black car, engine running, parked 3 spaces from the door, headlights off. And inside that car, someone had a tablet in their hands. Live feed. Our lobby. Camera 4. Timestamp. 9:42 p.m. They watched the replay once. Then they watched it again. The incident report was 3 pages long and said almost nothing. Caden read it twice in the parking lot under a broken light that kept flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. The language was clinical. Physical contact. Public setting. No injury sustained. No name on the filing. No signature from a staff witness. Filed at 9:44 p.m., 2 minutes after it happened. Someone had been ready. He folded the report and put it in his jacket pocket and stood there for a moment listening to his own breathing. The ER doors opened and closed behind him as other people moved in and out, living their normal, uncomplicated lives. A paramedic rolled an empty gurney past him without looking up. Caden walked to his car. He sat in it for a long time without starting the engine. Inside the hospital, things were moving faster than he knew. The security office on sublevel 1 was a small room with a wall of monitors and a smell like burnt coffee and old carpet. The overnight supervisor, a man named Gerald, had pulled up camera 3 separate times since the incident. He logged it once the way policy required. Then he got a call on the desk line, and after that, he logged it again, this time flagging it for administrative review and adding a second copy to an encrypted folder he didn't create. Gerald did not ask where that folder came from. Some things at Mercy General Hospital were better left unquestioned. Draven Kale, for his part, walked out of the hospital at 9:51 p.m. through a staff exit on the east side that most visitors didn't know existed. He had not been treated. He had not checked in. He had come in, done what he came to do, and left. His 2 brothers were waiting at the car. Neither of them said anything as he got in. The older of the 2, Devlin, looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Clean?" Devlin asked. "Clean," Draven said. The car pulled out. But Draven did not sleep that night. He sat in his home office at 2 a.m. with the lights off and replayed the look on Caden's face. Not the fear, he had expected the fear, but the moment just before it. That half-second of recognition. The way Caden's eyes had changed. He had not planned for that. That was the part that unsettled him. Caden, across the city, was also awake. He was sitting on the floor of his bathroom with his back against the tub because it was the only room in the apartment that felt small enough. His scalp still ached. Not dramatically, just a low, persistent throb that reminded him every few minutes that it had been real. His phone was on the tile beside him. He'd been staring at it for 40 minutes. At 2:17 a.m., a new message came in. Same unknown number. "You were never the weakest one in that room." Caden picked up the phone. Read it 3 times. His thumb hovered over the reply button. He did not reply. He set the phone face down on the tile and pressed both palms flat against the cold floor and breathed. The message sat unread in the visible sense. He had opened it, which meant somewhere on whatever device had sent it, a red receipt had just fired. The person watching that red receipt did not smile. They noted it, quietly, clinically, and then they began composing the next move. The first package appeared on his doorstep on a Tuesday. No label, no return address. Inside, a brown paper bag with a 7-day supply of the specific antihistamine Caden had been unable to find at the 2 pharmacies near his apartment. His exact brand, his exact dosage. He stood in his doorway for a full 30 seconds holding it, trying to work out a rational explanation. He almost threw it away. He didn't. He told himself it was probably a mistake. A neighbor's delivery. Something misdelivered. He told himself that right up until Wednesday evening, when he stepped out to check the mail and found a folded index card wedged between his mailbox and the wall. The man in the gray coat who has been standing across the street for the last 4 days is not waiting for a bus. He does not live on this block. Stay inside after 9 p.m. this week. Caden. He looked down at the card again. He looked up. Still nothing. He went inside and locked the door and stood at the window with the lights off for 20 minutes. At 8:47 p.m., a man in a gray coat came around the corner from the east end of the block, stopped on the opposite sidewalk, and lit a cigarette. He didn't look up at Caden's window. He just stood there. At 9:04 p.m., a black SUV turned slowly onto the block. It didn't stop. It rolled past at low speed, and the man in the gray coat watched it, then walked away. Caden did not sleep before midnight. The person leaving these things, these precise, targeted things, was watching him closely. Too closely. Not guessing. Knowing. The antihistamine had been a brand he'd ordered twice online months ago. The card had described a man who hadn't appeared yet when it was written. This was not someone observing him casually. This was surveillance. Structured, resourced surveillance. The part that made Caden's chest feel wrong was that it was working. Every time he told himself to report it, to call someone, to get away from all of it, the gray coat man came back into his head. The empty street came back. And instead of fear, what rose up first was something closer to relief. That was the part he didn't say out loud. Draven Kale watched Caden's apartment from 3 different vantage points across 4 nights. He never used the same position twice. He drove himself, no driver, no detail, because what he was doing was not official. It was not sanctioned. If his brothers knew the specifics, they would have questions he wasn't prepared to answer yet. He was not watching Caden because he cared. He was watching because Caden had become a liability, and liabilities needed managing. That was what he told himself. On the first night. On the second. By the 4th night, he had stopped narrating it to himself entirely. On Thursday morning, Caden found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a laminated copy of an employee badge for Mercy General Hospital. The photo on it was not Caden's. The name on it read D. Hargrove, Security Operations. There was a small red X drawn in marker over the face in the photo. Caden turned it over. Nothing on the back. He sat down slowly on his couch and held it in both hands and tried to understand what he was being told. Someone inside the hospital. Security. Identified. Marked. This wasn't protection from a stranger. This was protection from someone who had access. Resources. Eyes inside. His phone buzzed. A delivery notification, food, from a restaurant 6 blocks away that he ordered from maybe once a month. Except he hadn't ordered anything. The delivery arrived 8 minutes later. The bag was warm. The order was exact. As usual. No special requests forgotten. Caden sat at his kitchen table and ate it slowly, jaw tight, eyes on the door. At 2:17 a.m., footsteps stopped outside his door. They didn't knock. They didn't move for almost a full minute. Then they walked away. There was a meeting that Caden was never supposed to know about. It happened on a Friday, in a private dining room on the 14th floor of the Aldwyn Tower. One of those rooms with no windows on the street side and a table long enough to seat 12 but tonight set for only 4. The men who sat at it did not use their full names with each other. They used designations, titles, the kind of language that made everything deniable on paper. The one at the head of the table was called the director. He was 53. He wore reading glasses and a gray suit and looked like someone's accountant. He was not someone's accountant. The Kale block is stretched, said the man to his left. His name was Raylan Voss, and he had the kind of stillness that made people in rooms with him speak carefully. Draven pulled back from 2 contracts in the last quarter. He's managing exposure, which means he's managing something personal. The director slid a folder to the center of the table. We identified the variable. Inside the folder, a photograph. Caden Moreau, standing outside Mercy General, taken from distance. Slightly blurred, clearly candid. Former connection, the director continued. Verified. 3 years of overlap. Deep enough that the public incident last week reads as intentional, but the question is intentional toward whom? The man across from Raylan, who hadn't spoken yet, leaned forward and looked at the photo. His name was Omari Fitch, and he had made and lost more money than most people would ever see, and had rebuilt it 3 times, and none of that history was pleasant. You're saying Kale didn't cut him loose. You're saying Kale used him. I'm saying Kale made a very public display of rejection in a very well-surveilled environment, the director said. 2 cameras, 12 witnesses, all of it logged. He paused, which means either Draven Kale lost his composure in front of an ER full of people, or he wanted that moment on record. Silence at the table. If it's the second one, Raylan said slowly, then the Omega isn't a loose end. He's bait. Which makes him useful to us, the director said. Omari sat back, quiet for a moment. Then, he doesn't know? He knows nothing, the director said. He's been receiving anonymous protection from what I assume is Kale's operation. Small gestures, building dependency. The subject is confused, frightened, and isolated. Classic preconditions. He closed the folder. We get to him before the dependency locks in. We offer him something Kale can't offer. Transparency. Or we let him believe we're offering it, Raylan said. The director looked at him over the rim of his glasses. Same thing in the short term. The meeting ended at 10:22 p.m. Caden was sitting in his apartment eating leftover food he hadn't ordered himself, watching the news with the sound low, when his phone buzzed. Not a text, a voicemail, unknown number, different from the one that had been messaging him. He listened to it once. A voicemail, calm, professional. Mr. Moreau, you've been in someone's game for longer than you know. We'd like to offer you the full picture. No obligation, no strings. You can reach us when you're ready. A number followed. Then the line ended. Caden set the phone down. He replayed the word game in his head, turned it over. He thought about the ER, about Draven's hand in his hair, about the index card, about the gray coat man, about the envelope with the badge copy, the red X over a face he didn't recognize, about how precise it had all been, how deliberate. He had told himself it was protection. He had almost let himself believe that. Now someone was telling him it was strategy. The two things could both be true. He knew that. He was not naive. He picked up his phone again and did not call the number. He opened a different contact instead. One he hadn't used in months, a lawyer he trusted, and typed a single line. Need to talk. Not over the phone. He sent it. Set the phone down. The next morning, he walked to the corner store 2 blocks away. The gray coat man was gone. The block felt quiet in a way that blocks feel when something has just moved out of place. He bought coffee. He walked back. He was 2 steps from his building door when he felt it, the specific awareness of being watched. Not the gray coat man. Not from across the street. From above and from behind. He didn't look up. He didn't turn around. He went inside. Locked the door. Stood with his back against it. His phone buzzed. A message from Draven's name. Not an unknown number this time. A contact he had buried 3 levels deep in his phone under a false name and had not heard from in 2 years. He's in play now. Caden's blood went cold. The message wasn't addressed to him. It wasn't formatted as a message to him. It was a forwarded text. Someone had sent it to Draven, and Draven, for whatever reason, had sent it to him instead. Or had appeared to. Caden could not tell the difference. And that, more than anything else so far, was what terrified him. 2 days later, the man in the gray coat was replaced by a woman. She appeared on a Wednesday, across the street near the bus stop, wearing a dark green jacket and carrying a canvas tote. She didn't stare at his building. She looked at her phone, shifted her weight, checked the time, blended in. If Caden hadn't been watching the block the way he'd taught himself to, he wouldn't have noticed that she'd been in the same spot for 40 minutes without a bus arriving. He noticed. He closed the blinds and sat in the kitchen and felt the walls of the situation pressing in from all sides. The lawyer he'd messaged had responded Thursday, 11 a.m., the place with the blue awning. He had 1 day. That same Wednesday evening, 3 blocks south and 11 floors up, Draven Kale was on the phone with a man he didn't like, agreeing to a meeting he didn't want. The Fitch group made contact, his brother Devlin said, standing at the window with his arms crossed. They moved faster than we expected. We accounted for faster, Draven said. We accounted for them approaching him directly, not for the message forward. Devlin turned from the window. That was sloppy. Draven said nothing. It was deliberate, said the third brother, DeMarcus, from the couch without looking up. He was younger than the other 2 by 4 minutes, and had the habit of stating conclusions that everyone else was working toward, simply and flatly, before they arrived. He wanted Caden to see it. To know Kale's name was still in the equation. Draven set his phone down. He's starting to depend on the net, DeMarcus continued. The deliveries, the warnings. He's scared and alone, and whatever he felt before is still in there, or he'd have filed a police report by now. He paused. You're managing him. The question is whether you know why. Draven looked at his brother for a long moment. Then he walked out of the room. Devlin and DeMarcus exchanged a look. Neither of them said anything else. Caden did not know Draven's name had appeared on his phone by choice. He spent Wednesday night going over every interaction since the ER, trying to map the logic. Someone had filed that incident report. Someone had sent him medication, food, a badge copy, a warning about a gray coat man who later appeared. Someone had sent him a message saying he wasn't the weakest one in the room. All of it had come from angles that required resources, access, coordination, not comfort, not guilt, strategy. He lay in bed with the ceiling fan turning slow and the city humming outside and tried to trace the threads. Who benefited from him being frightened but alive? Who benefited from him being isolated but watched? Who had enough access to Mercy General's security system to file a flagged report in 2 minutes? He fell asleep before he found an answer. He dreamed about a promise. He was 12 in the dream, maybe 13, and the light was the kind of late afternoon gold that only exists in memory. There was a boy standing beside him, taller, quieter, already with that particular stillness in his body that some people carry like a weight they've made peace with. Draven, not a king, just a boy. And the boy said something low and direct that Caden couldn't fully hear in the dream, only feel, the shape of it, the weight of it, the quality of a thing that was meant. He woke up at 6:08 a.m. and lay still for a moment. Then he got up. He was at the coffee maker when he looked out the kitchen window and saw it. A figure standing on the opposite sidewalk, just at the edge of the streetlight's reach. Not the gray coat man. Not the woman in the green jacket. This figure was taller, broader, standing completely still, looking directly at his window. The distance was too great to see a face. Just a silhouette. Dark coat, hands at his sides. Caden did not move. The figure stood there for 30 seconds. Then it stepped back into the shadow and was gone. Caden's coffee finished brewing. He did not pour it. At 7:15 a.m., he walked to the window of his front room and looked toward the building entrance below. On the top step, pressed flat against the door, was a folded piece of paper. He went down and got it. One line. Handwritten. Not printed, handwritten, in a script he did not recognize. Thursday's meeting is already known. Change the location. He stood in the lobby of his building and looked at that line for a long time. His lawyer. His private message. His private contact. No. He was not being watched from the outside. He was being watched from everywhere. And somewhere in that realization, beneath the fear, beneath the anger at being moved around like a piece on a board, was something worse. Something he didn't want to name. He trusted the warning. He had read it and his first instinct was not doubt. It was not anger. It was to change the location, which meant whoever was doing this had already won something they hadn't even asked for. Across the city, in a glass-walled office that smelled of clean air and something expensive, Draven Kale stood at his desk and looked out the window at nothing in particular. His phone buzzed once on the surface behind him. He didn't pick it up. He already knew what it said. His brother DeMarcus appeared in the office doorway. He read it, DeMarcus said. Draven nodded once. And? DeMarcus asked. Draven was quiet for a moment. Then, he'll change the location. Because he trusts it, DeMarcus said. Draven did not answer. Outside the window, the city moved on. Loud and oblivious and completely unaware of the lines being drawn inside it. And from 3 blocks away, in a dark car with its engine off, a second phone buzzed with a single incoming notification. The Fitch Group's surveillance had just clocked Caden leaving his building, note in hand, expression tight. Raylan Voss looked at the notification, looked at the timestamp. Then he typed back 2 words. Move Thursday. What do you think Draven's real motive is? Protecting Caden or protecting himself? Drop your answer below. The gala was already wrong before Caden walked through the door. He felt it the second he stepped under the lights. That specific shift in the air, the kind that happens when a room has already decided something about you and is waiting for you to figure it out. The Aldwin Foundation Charity Gala. Mercy General's annual fundraiser. White tablecloths and crystal and the kind of smiling that costs money to learn. Caden had been invited through the hospital's community liaison office, where he volunteered twice a month. Legitimate. Clean. He had no reason not to come. That was the point. He was wearing a dark navy jacket he'd pressed himself and shoes he'd polished the night before, and for about 40 minutes he was fine. He circulated. He shook hands. He accepted a glass of sparkling water he didn't drink and stood near the edge of the main ballroom and told himself this was normal. He was allowed to be here. Nobody was watching. Then Dr. Aaliyah Crane approached him. He'd seen her at the hospital twice. She was on the ethics subcommittee, sharp, careful with words. She leaned in just slightly and said in a low voice, "You might want to know there's a conversation happening near the East Bar." She didn't look at him when she said it. She was scanning the room the way people do when they're pretending they're not delivering information. "About you. And some paperwork with your name on it." She moved on before he could respond. He did not go to the East Bar immediately. He found a column near the edge of the room and stood close to it and watched. And there, yes, a cluster of 3 people. 2 men and a woman. He recognized one of the men from the hospital board directory. The woman was holding a folder. The second man was speaking low and leaning in, and the other 2 were nodding with the specific rhythm of people receiving confirmation of something they already suspected. Caden's name. He couldn't hear it. He read it on the woman's lips. The folder changed hands. 20 minutes later, the whispers started finding him. Not loud. Not dramatic. That was the part that was hardest to fight. It was the way people's eyes moved when he walked past. The conversation that paused at the wrong moment. The woman who looked at him with something between pity and satisfaction and then looked away too fast. He went to get water. The server, young, clearly nervous, fumbled the glass and apologized 3 times and would not make eye contact. He found a chair near the back wall and sat down and told himself to breathe. The folder. Someone had planted something. Documents with his name on them circulated through the right hands before the right people, in a room full of exactly the people whose opinions shaped professional futures. This was not random. He thought about the note. Thursday's meeting is already known. They had known what he was going to do before he did it. And he had changed the meeting location like the note told him to, but they had still gotten here. Into this room. Into this gala. Into the folder. He was being positioned. Not attacked. Positioned. Like a prop. The room was beautiful. Chandelier light, soft music. People in their best clothes doing their best impressions of people who mattered. And somewhere in it, Caden Moreau was a piece being moved across a board he couldn't see. 2 security officers appeared at the edge of his vision, moving toward him through the crowd. Unhurried. Deliberate. He stayed in his chair. He did not run. His jaw tightened and he set his water glass down and watched them come and made a decision, in that single breath, not to show them fear. From the second level of the Aldwin Ballroom, in the curved balcony that looked down over the main floor, Draven Kale stood with both hands on the railing. He watched the officers approach Caden. He watched Caden sit still. He watched the room's whisper current shift, turn, tighten. He did not move. His brother DeMarcus appeared beside him. "Now?" DeMarcus said quietly. Draven said nothing. "Draven." "Not yet." DeMarcus looked at the floor below. Looked back at his brother. Whatever he was going to say, he didn't say it. The officers reached Caden's chair. One of them bent down slightly to speak. Caden looked up at them. Straight on. Steady. And from above, Draven Kale watched every second of it. And did nothing. The room they put him in was not a holding cell. It was an administrative office on the 3rd floor. Borrowed, clearly, because there was still a half-finished cup of coffee on the desk from whoever normally worked there. 2 chairs. A window that looked at a wall. The officers who brought him up had been courteous, professionally neutral, which was somehow worse than if they'd been hostile. They told him there were discrepancies in the volunteer credentialing records. His name, his file, signatures that didn't match. He told them he hadn't signed anything fraudulent. They said they understood and asked him to wait while the matter was reviewed. They closed the door. Caden sat in the chair by the window and looked at the wall and did the math. Credentialing records. Volunteer signatures. Someone had gotten into the system. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough. Just enough to put his name on something that looked wrong from a distance. in a room full of people who already had a reason to look. 20 minutes passed. The door opened. Not an officer. Draven. He closed the door behind him, did not take the second chair, stood with his back against the door and looked at Caden the way he had in the ER, direct, measured, in control of something Caden could not identify. There's a device in the collar of the jacket I was wearing in the ER, Draven said. No preamble. No greeting. Caden stared at him. A microphone, concealed. The kind that picks up ambient sound and transmits to a receiver within 40 meters. Draven's voice was flat, factual. The ER was a target location. Raylan Voss and 2 members of his operation were in that building that night. Not as patients, as surveillance. They had been tracking my movements for 11 days. Caden felt something cold move through him. So you. I needed them to see a clean break. Draven held his gaze. If they believed you were discarded publicly, visibly, irreversibly, you became worthless to them as leverage. They wouldn't approach you, wouldn't use you. You'd be below the line of interest. Silence. The hum of the building. Somewhere below, the gala music was still playing. You used me, Caden said. I removed you from a list, Draven said. The people on Voss's active list don't stay safe. You pulled my hair in an emergency room in front of 12 people and phones. And every one of those recordings is now evidence in a federal filing. Draven did not flinch. The incident was logged, time-stamped, and witnessed. Every camera in that ER captured it. I needed a public record of the break. Something no one could reframe later as staged. Caden stood up. The chair scraped back. You are telling me, he said slowly, that you planned all of it. The ER, the humiliation, the way I felt standing there while people stared at me with their phones up. Yes, one word, no softening. Caden laughed, not from humor, from the specific place where shock runs out of room and has nowhere else to go. And the notes? The food? The warnings about the gray coat man. Parallel track, Draven said, keeping you functional while the operation moved. Functional. The word landed like something dropped on concrete. You survived because I made you untouchable, Draven said. Voss's group never approached you directly. They planted documents tonight because they moved to the next stage, which means the original play didn't hold. They adapted, which also means they're scared. He stepped away from the door. Toward Caden. Not close, just closer. The gala tonight was their move because they're running out of moves. Caden held himself still. He thought about the dream, the boy in the afternoon light, the weight of something meant. He thought about sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m. reading a message that said he wasn't the weakest one in the room. Feeling something that was not supposed to feel like comfort. I was strategy, he said, not a target. Draven did not deny it. That was worse than anything he could have said. Get out, Caden said. Draven stayed 1 second too long. Then he moved to the door, his hand on the handle. The nurse from the night in the ER, he said without turning around. Her name is Deja Rollins. She kept a copy of the security feed. She has been waiting to understand what she saw. She's going to have answers very soon. He opened the door and left. Caden stood in the empty room. The borrowed coffee on the desk had gone completely cold. The gala was still running 1 floor below. Soft music, crystal, carefully maintained smiles. He sat back down. He pressed both hands flat on his knees and sat with what he now knew. He had been a calculation, not a mistake, not even collateral damage, something more precise than that. He had been the piece that made the board look real. And the worst part, the part he couldn't outrun. It had worked. The federal filing dropped on a Monday. Not with noise. That was the thing about real consequences, they don't announce themselves. There was no press conference on Monday morning. No dramatic footage. Just a case number appearing in a public court index, and an attorney on record, and a list of named parties that took most of the legal community 3 hours to process. The hospital board got the news internally first. 11 members. 6 of them had names in the filing. That matters. 6 out of 11. Mercy General's corruption wasn't a fringe problem. It was structural. It had been running long enough to go from active choice to operating assumption, the kind of thing where people stopped asking questions because the questions had stopped feeling necessary. The filing named Raylan Voss as the central connective figure. Not the top. Voss was never the top. He was the link. The man who moved between the hospital system's administrative failures and something far larger. A trafficking network that had been using the ER intake process as a screening point. Vulnerable individuals. Off-grid. No consistent contact. The kind of people who came in alone and left alone and whose records were easy to alter. Caden read the filing twice. He read it a third time when he got to the section on access to hospital security systems. The badge in his envelope, D. Hargrove Security Operations, red X over the face, was listed on page 41. Hargrove had been the internal access point, the person who had given Voss's operation visibility into who came through the ER, when and under what circumstances. The red X had been a marker, not a warning, a confirmation. Draven's operation had already removed Hargrove from the equation before the envelope appeared under Caden's door. He was being told it was safe. He just hadn't known what safe meant in that context. The investigation had been running in parallel for 7 months. Not 3 weeks. Not since the ER incident. 7 months, Draven's operation, working alongside a federal task force that had been building the Voss case from the outside in while Draven worked it from the inside out. The ER incident had been the trigger. The moment that forced Voss's group to accelerate, to start making moves, to surface enough to be caught. Caden had been the accelerant. He put the filing down on his kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. He was not angry. The anger had moved through him over the previous 72 hours and had left something quieter and harder in its place. Not peace. Clarity. He had been used. That was true. He had been placed in a position without his knowledge or consent and operated around like a variable in someone else's equation. Also true. And 11 people were now facing federal charges. A trafficking screening operation had been dismantled. 6 hospital board members who had looked the other way, or done worse, were under indictment. The ER where Caden had stood with someone's hand in his hair, shaking, trying to remember how to breathe. That ER now had a chance to be something other than what it had been. Also true. He did not know what to do with the fact that both things existed in the same space. He was still sitting with it when his phone rang. Actual call. Dr. Aaliyah Crane. "I'm testifying Thursday," she said without preamble. She had been the one to warn him at the gala. He understood now that she had known more than she'd let on that night. She was one of the people who had been watching carefully and quietly from inside the hospital. "I wanted you to know before you heard it from somewhere else." "Thank you," he said. "Caden." A pause. "You should be there. Not as a witness. You don't have to say anything. Just be in the room." She hung up. He looked at the filing on his table. The nurse from the ER, Deja Rollins, had already come forward publicly. 2 days after the gala, before the filing dropped, she had given a statement that corroborated the security footage she had preserved from the night of the incident. Her testimony was the thread that had unlocked the footage's chain of custody. Without it, the tape had a gap in its legal standing. With her statement, it was clean. She had been holding that copy for weeks. She had waited until she understood what she was looking at. Caden thought about her standing at the triage desk mid-step, staring at the security monitor. He had thought she was staring at him. Draven. She had been looking at the record, making sure it held. Thursday arrived. He sat in the back row of the federal courtroom. He wore a plain gray jacket. He did not know if Draven was in the building. He did not look for him. He watched Deja Rollins take the stand. She was calm. Her voice didn't waver. She answered every question with the same focused precision of someone who had been practicing staying clear-headed in a room designed to make you flinch. When it was over and the room began to empty, Caden stayed in his seat for a few minutes, not waiting for anything, just sitting in the stillness of something that had finally been said out loud in a room built for saying things. Then he got up and walked out. The courtyard at the back of the federal building had a row of trees just starting to come back from winter. He stood under them and breathed the outside air and felt the weight of the last 3 weeks pressing down and then slowly redistributing. He heard footsteps on the path behind him. He did not turn around. He already knew. The courtyard was empty except for them. No staff, no press, no one positioned with a tablet and a live feed. Just the trees and the early light and the sound of the city moving past on the other side of the building's wall. Indifferent, continuous, unaware. Draven stopped a few feet behind him. Caden did not turn around yet. She did well, Draven said. She was honest, Caden said. That's different from doing well. A pause. You're right, Draven said. It is. Caden turned around. Draven looked the same as he always did. Composed, still, the kind of still that comes from having made too many decisions under pressure to let any single moment show on your face. He was not in a suit today. Dark jacket, dark pants. No visible backup. No detail positioned at the tree line. For once, they were just two people standing in a courtyard. Say what you came to say, Caden said. Draven looked at him. Not through him. Not over him. At him. I didn't protect you gently, he said. Because gentle things break. The words landed flat. Not cruel. Not tender. Just honest in the way that things are honest when someone has stopped packaging them. Caden let them sit for a moment. That's not for me to carry, he said. That's your reasoning for your choices. I'm not here to validate it. I know. You made a decision about my life. About my body. About what I was allowed to know and when. Caden's voice did not rise. You made that decision for 7 months without asking me once. Yes. And it worked, Caden said. I know that. I've read the filing. I know what was dismantled. I know what would have happened to the people cycling through that ER if this had gone on another 6 months. He stopped. That doesn't make what you did to me okay. Both things are true. I can hold both. Draven's jaw shifted. Just slightly. What do you want? He asked. Not what you're prepared to offer, Caden said. Then tell me what that is. You want to claim this. Caden looked at him straight. That's what you came here for. You want to stand in front of me after everything and say something that makes it a story with a clean ending. Something that sounds like a vow. He tilted his head. I've watched you operate for 3 weeks. I know how you frame things. Draven said nothing. I am not a territory, Caden said. I am not a position to be held or a variable to be managed. I'm not something you protect and then own. His voice stayed even. Cost him something to keep it even, and he paid it. If you want to stand next to me going forward, you stand next to me. Equal ground. No moves that don't go through me first. No decisions about my life made from a car outside my building at 2 a.m. The silence stretched. I don't know how to do that, Draven said. Not as an excuse. As a fact. I know, Caden said. I have spent every year of my adult life making decisions for people who didn't know they needed them made. Draven looked at him. I don't know how to be in a room with someone as a partner. I know how to be in a room as a wall. Then learn, Caden said. Draven was quiet for a long time. Then he did something Caden had not seen coming. He went down on one knee. Not a proposal. Not theater. His knee on the courtyard stone and his head slightly forward and his hands loose at his sides. Not submission. Not performance. Something older than both of those things, a deliberate lowering. A choice to be smaller than his default in a space with no audience, for no one but the person in front of him. Caden looked at him. I'm not asking you to forgive the method, Draven said from where he knelt. I'm asking you to let me stay in the room while I figure out how to be different in it. The city went on past the wall. Cars and voices and the ordinary momentum of lives that knew nothing about this courtyard. Caden looked at him for a long time. Get up, he said finally. Draven rose. You don't get a clean start, Caden said. You get a conditional one. And I set the conditions. Draven nodded once. The first condition is that from today forward, You tell me what's happening before it happens. No post-briefings. No retroactive explanations. Caden held his gaze. If I'm in the game, I know the rules while the game is running. Agreed. Second, the lawyer I was going to meet, the one whose appointment you already knew about, I'm going to meet with her this week. Without interference. Already cleared. Caden paused. You cleared it before I asked. Habit, Draven said. That's the third condition. You break the habit. Something in Draven's face shifted. Not softening. More like a wall with a door installed in it, and the door opening for the first time, showing something behind it that had been in the dark for a long time. It's going to take time, he said. Most things worth anything do, Caden said. The ethics board met for the first time on a Thursday morning in late spring. The conference room was on the fourth floor of the rebuilt administrative wing. Rebuilt because the old one had been closed pending review, which was the clean institutional language for what had actually happened, which was that 6 of the people who had used it regularly were now awaiting trial. The room had a long table, large windows, and 7 chairs. 4 of them were filled by people who had been there before in different capacities. 3 of them were new. Caden Moreau sat in the 3rd new chair. He had a folder in front of him and a pen he hadn't opened yet and a cup of coffee that was still hot. He was listening to the chair of the board, a woman named Dr. Fontaine Elias, walk through the committee's restructured mandate with the kind of precision that came from someone who had thought about it a great deal before this morning. He was not the most powerful person in the room. He was also not the least. He was exactly where he was. A volunteer coordinator turned community advocate turned ethics board member, there because he had been in the room where things happened and had chosen to stay standing, and because Dr. Crane had recommended him, and because the filing had made certain kinds of silence harder to maintain. It was not a dramatic arrival. That was the thing about real change. It doesn't look like the moment people expect. It looks like a Thursday meeting. Folder. A still hot cup of coffee. The investigations closed in stages the way they always do, not a single moment of conclusion, but a series of smaller ones that compound into permanence. Raylan Voss entered a plea in late April. Omari Fitch cooperated with the federal task force and negotiated a reduced exposure. The director, whose name had finally been printed in a court document, Terrence Hale, had his assets frozen in March and his trial date set for the fall. The hospital's credentialing system was overhauled. New auditing protocols. External review committee. The intake process that had been used as a screening point was restructured from the ground up with 2 nonprofit partners brought in to co-manage vulnerable patient tracking. Deja Rollins was promoted to Senior Security Compliance Officer. She had accepted without drama the way people accept things they've already decided they've earned. Draven Kale was not at the ethics board meeting. He was not in the building. That was, by this point, expected. He had been working with the federal task force as a cooperating asset, and cooperating assets kept profiles low until the last of the related proceedings closed. He texted Caden at 9:07 a.m. How's the room? Caden looked at the message under the table while Dr. Elias moved to the second agenda item. He typed back, big enough. He put his phone face down and opened his folder and uncapped his pen. That evening, they met in a place that was not a hospital courtyard and not a borrowed office and not a dark car outside a building. It was a small restaurant near the east side of the city, the kind with no dress code and tables that were too close together and a menu that changed weekly. Caden had picked it. That had been the arrangement. They sat across from each other with the kind of quiet that had stopped being uncomfortable 3 weeks ago. How was it? Draven asked. Productive, Caden said. We're bringing in a patient advocate liaison. Deja's team is going to interface with Intake Weekly. He paused. It's slow, but it's structural. Draven nodded. Caden looked at him. You knew about Dr. Crane, that she was inside the hospital before any of this surfaced. It wasn't a question. Yes, Draven said. Did she know about me? About what I was? She knew you were connected to me. She didn't know the specifics. But she warned me at the gala. She made her own call, Draven said. I didn't ask her to. Caden held that, filed it. There's going to be more, he said. Things from the last 7 months that come up over time. Details I don't have yet. Yes, Draven said. I'm going to ask about them when they come up, and you're going to answer. Yes. The food arrived. They ate for a while without filling the silence unnecessarily. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, loud, indifferent, full of people living inside their own separate sets of stakes. Somewhere in it, court proceedings were still running. Records were being filed. A system that had been performing one function while serving another was being slowly, painstakingly converted into what it was supposed to be. Slow, structural, real. Draven set his fork down and looked across the table. I don't own you, he said. The words were quiet, not a declaration. More like a thing being said out loud to make it binding. Caden looked back at him. Good, he said. Then stand beside me. Not a grand moment. Not a crowd. Just two people in a restaurant that was a little too loud, at a table that was a little too small, with the distance between them finally, for the first time, honest. Draven held his gaze. Then he nodded. Once. Outside, the evening moved on. And somewhere in a federal court archive, in a case file that would be referenced for years by attorneys and advocates and people building better systems out of the wreckage of corrupted ones, was a timestamp. 9:42 p.m. ER lobby. Camera 4. The moment that started it. One grip. One camera. One nurse who kept a copy of something she didn't fully understand yet. Predators choose territory. Kings choose who they protect. He finally chose differently. The story is done. But Caden and Draven's world is just getting started. If you've been watching what they built out of something that should have broken them, drop a comment. Whose growth surprised you more, Caden's strength or Draven's surrender? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story on this channel. Because we tell stories here that are dark, real, and worth something. Share this one with someone who needs to see that power doesn't always look like what you expect. We'll see you in the next one.